My name is Daniel Harper, a 42-year-old architect living in a quiet suburb of Portland with my wife, Emily, and our two kids, Jacob and Lily. Emily and I had been married for 17 years, a union built on late-night conversations, shared dreams, and the kind of trust you don't question until it's gone. She was a graphic designer, freelancing from home, her creativity spilling into every corner of our lives. I'd always admired her spark, the way she could turn a blank canvas into something alive. Our life wasn't perfect, whose is? But it was ours, and I thought it was solid. It started subtly, the way erosion carves a cliff over decades. Emily began spending more time on her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen with a rhythm I didn't recognize. She'd smile at messages, then tuck the device away when I entered the room, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. I'd ask, casually, "Who's that?" And she'd shrug, "Just a client." I believed her because doubting her felt like doubting the sun would rise. But the late nights grew frequent. Her in the office, door cracked, soft laughter drifting out. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was nothing. Then came the trips. Workshops, she called them. Weekend jaunts to Seattle or San Francisco for networking. She'd pack light, kiss me goodbye, and leave with a breeziness that didn't match the woman who once clung to routine. I'd watch her car pull away, the kids waving from the porch, and feel a hollow ache I couldn't explain. When she returned, she was different, brighter, but distant, like she'd left a piece of herself somewhere else. I'd ask about the workshops, and she'd give vague answers, her hands fidgeting with her coffee mug. "Oh, design stuff," she'd say, and I'd nod, swallowing the unease. One night, I found a receipt in her purse, $87 at a place called the Velvet Room, a bar in Seattle. She'd said the workshop was all-day sessions, no time for drinks. I held the crumpled paper, my thumb tracing the date, and felt the first crack in our foundation. I didn't confront her, not then. I tucked it away, telling myself it was a mistake, a group outing, anything but what my gut whispered. But the whispers grew louder, and I started noticing things. A new perfume, sharp and unfamiliar. A pair of earrings I hadn't bought. A hesitation in her kiss. I wasn't a suspicious man by nature, but suspicion doesn't care about your nature. It grows where trust thins. I remember the day I decided to look closer. It was a Tuesday, gray and damp, the kids at school. Emily was in her office, humming softly, and I slipped into our bedroom, her laptop glowing on the nightstand. I'd never snooped before. Felt wrong, like breaking a vow, but my hands moved anyway. Her password was still Lily Jacobs 16, and the screen bloomed with emails. Most were mundane, client briefs and invoices, but one caught my eye, a thread with Mark T. No subject line, just a string of replies buried deep. I clicked and the world tilted. "Missed you last weekend," he wrote. "Next time, no interruptions." Her reply, "Can't wait." My chest tightened, breath shallow. As I scrolled, piecing together a story I didn't want to know. Mark Tanner. That was his full name, pulled from a signature at the bottom of an email. I didn't know him, but I needed to. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling, and sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the framed photo of Emily and me from our 10th anniversary. Smiling, oblivious. The kids' laughter echoed from a memory, not the house, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. Who was this man? How long had he been part of her world while I'd been blind? I turned to the internet, my architect's precision guiding me. A quick search on LinkedIn revealed him. Mark Tanner, 38, a photographer based in Seattle. His profile was polished. Headshot of a lean guy with dark hair, a crooked smile, and eyes that seemed to know too much. He specialized in intimate portraiture, whatever that meant, and had a portfolio link I didn't dare click. Not yet. His posts bragged about gallery shows, collaborations with designers, and weekend escapes. One line stuck. "Nothing beats a muse who inspires every frame." My stomach churned. Was that her? I cross-referenced Emily's workshop dates with his social media. Seattle, June 12th, same weekend she'd gone. San Francisco, August 19th, another match. He'd posted a cryptic photo then, a woman's silhouette against a sunset, captioned, "Chasing light." No face, but the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of her head. It was Emily. I knew her shape like I knew my own hands. I stared at the screen, the pixels burning into me, and felt a rage I didn't recognize. This wasn't a fling. It was a life she'd built behind my back. That night, she came to bed late, her hair damp from a shower, and slid under the covers without a word. I lay still, pretending to sleep, her warmth beside me a lie. I wanted to scream, to shake her awake and demand answers, but I didn't. I needed proof, something undeniable, because doubt still clawed at me, begging me to be wrong. The next day, I called a friend, Tom, who ran a small PI firm. Discreet, I told him. I need to know where she goes. He didn't ask why, just nodded over the phone. Give me a week. A week stretched into forever. I went through the motions, work, kids, dinners where Emily chatted about nothing, her voice a mask. Tom's first report came Friday. Photos of her at a cafe in Portland, not working, but laughing across from Mark. He'd driven down from Seattle, his arm brushing hers, her hand lingering on his. The images were grainy, but the truth was sharp. I locked them in my desk drawer, the key cold in my palm, and planned my next step. Revenge wasn't a word I'd used before, but it fit now, heavy and inevitable. Living with Emily after that was like walking a tightrope over a pit I couldn't see. I smiled at her over breakfast, asked about her day, kissed her forehead before work, all while the photos burned a hole in my mind. She didn't notice the strain in my voice, the way my hands clenched under the table. Maybe she didn't want to. The kids kept me grounded, Jacob's soccer games, Lily's art projects, but even they felt distant, like I was watching them through glass. Tom kept digging. His second report landed in my inbox. A hotel receipt, the Elliott in Seattle, booked under Mark's name, same dates as Emily's last workshop. 2 nights, a king suite, late checkout. I pictured her there, in a room I'd never see, her laughter echoing off walls that weren't ours. Tom added a note. They're careful, but not invisible. Let me know how far you want this. I didn't reply. How far? I didn't know yet, but the edge was close. I started tracking her myself, small things at first. Her phone stayed locked now, new habit, but I'd catch her typing, her lips curving into a smile she never wore for me. I found a burner phone in her coat pocket one night, cheap and black. No contacts saved, but a single number in the call log. I dialed it from my office line, heart pounding, and a man's voice answered, low and casual. Hey you! I hung up, bile rising, and knew it was him. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the intimacy, the secrets she'd gifted him while I got scraps. I'd built our life, every brick, and she'd carved out a corner for someone else. I couldn't confront her yet. The rage needed shape, so I watched, waited, and let it fester. At night, I'd lie awake, her breathing soft beside me, and imagine her with him, his hands her size, until the images twisted into something I could use. I'm not a cruel man, or I wasn't. But betrayal changes you, sharpens edges you didn't know you had. I didn't want a divorce. That was too clean, too easy for her. Emily had to feel this, not just lose it. I started small, testing her. Met a guy at work who knows a photographer named Mark, I said one morning, watching her over my coffee. Her spoon paused mid-stir, eyes flicking to mine, then away. Oh, small world, she mumbled, and changed the subject. She was good, but not perfect. Tom's third report was gold. Audio from a bug he'd planted in Mark's car, risky, but I'd paid extra. Their voices filled my headphones, casual at first, then intimate. Daniel suspects nothing, she said, laughing. He's too busy with his blueprints. Mark's reply, good, keeps us free. I replayed it, her tone slicing deeper each time. She'd mocked me, reduced me to a clueless husband while she danced in his world. The cruelty of it fueled me. I dug into Mark next. His life was an open book online, gallery shows, a loft in Capitol Hill, a reputation for charm. But he had weaknesses. A gambling habit, debts to shady lenders, a DUI he'd barely dodged. Emily didn't know, I bet. She saw the artist, not the mess. I could use that. I contacted a guy I'd met years ago, Vince, who handled problems for cash. No questions, just results. Ruin him? I told Vince over a burner of my own. Financially, socially, all of it. But slow. At home, I played the part, doting husband, oblivious fool. I cooked her favorite meals, left notes on her desk, watched her squirm under the weight of my kindness. She'd thank me, her smile tight, and I'd wonder if she felt the trap closing. The kids noticed nothing. They were too young, too pure. But I saw her unraveling. Late nights turned restless, her phone buzzing ignored. She sensed something, but not enough. Vince worked fast. A week later, Mark's gallery show in Seattle tanked. Anonymous tips to sponsors about his debts. Whispers of forged signatures on prints. His Instagram went dark. Posts replaced by silence. I checked Emily's face that morning. Her eyes were red, her coffee untouched. Rough night, I asked, all concern. Yeah, just tired. She lied, and I smiled inside. She didn't know I'd lit the match. Tom sent new photos. Mark at a bar, alone, haggard. Emily wasn't there. She'd canceled her next workshop, claiming a deadline. I knew better. Their burner calls dropped. I tapped her line, heard her voice crack when he didn't answer. Mark, what's wrong? She'd pleaded once. Silence. I'd severed their lifeline, and she felt it. At home, she grew brittle, snapping at the kids, retreating to her office. I let her stew, my mask intact. I wasn't done. Vince had more. Mark's landlord got a tip about irregular payments. Eviction looming. His car, leased, vanished from repo. I pictured him scrambling, the golden boy crumbling, and felt a cold satisfaction. Emily's betrayal had been a slow burn. Her punishment would be too. I'd take her world apart piece by piece, starting with him. She'd built a fantasy. I'd make it a nightmare. That night, she sat across from me at dinner, quiet, her fork tracing circles in her food. You okay? I asked, voice soft. She nodded, eyes distant, and I knew she was thinking of him. Good. Let her mourn what I'd already begun to destroy. The kids chattered, oblivious, and I leaned back, plotting the next move. This was just the beginning. She'd feel the weight soon enough. Emily's unraveling became a quiet spectacle. She'd always been the steady one, the artist who turned chaos into beauty, but now her edges frayed. Mornings found her staring into her coffee, her phone silent beside her, no longer buzzing with secret life. I'd catch her glancing at it, waiting, and I'd sip my own mug, hiding the satisfaction. Mark's world was collapsing, Vince's handiwork, and she felt the ripples without knowing why. I'd severed their thread, and she was adrift. I kept up the charade, the devoted husband she'd mocked in those recordings. You seem off, I'd say, touching her shoulder, and she'd flinch, muttering about deadlines. Her office, once a sanctuary, became a cage. She'd pace there, door shut, her humming replaced by silence. The kids noticed too. Mom's weird, Jacob said one night, kicking a soccer ball against the garage. Lily nodded, clutching her sketchbook. She doesn't draw with me anymore. I hugged them, promising it was just stress. But inside, I fueled it. Vince sent updates. Mark's creditors were circling, his loft lease canceled, his equipment seized for unpaid loans. A gallery in Portland dropped him after anonymous complaints, my doing, through a fake email. I pictured him scrambling, that crooked smile gone, and wondered if Emily sensed his fall. She didn't mention him, of course. She couldn't, but her eyes betrayed her, hollow and searching. I fed her unease with small barbs. Heard about a photographer losing everything up north, I said casually over dinner. Her fork froze, then resumed, too steady to be natural. Tom's latest report added fuel. A text from her burner, unsent, saved as a draft. I need you. Where are you? I read it in my office, the house asleep, and felt the sting of her longing. Not for me, never for me. It sharpened my resolve. I'd taken Mark's stability, Now I'd take her comfort. I started small, moving her things, her favorite pen vanished, her sketchpads rearranged. She'd frown, search, then shrug, blaming herself. I'd watch, silent, planting doubt in the life she'd taken for granted. One night, she broke. I found her in the kitchen, 2 a.m., staring at a glass of wine she hadn't touched. "Can't sleep?" I asked, leaning in the doorway. She jumped, then nodded, her voice small. "Just thinking." I sat across from her, feigning concern, and she looked at me, really looked, for the first time in weeks. "You're always so steady, Daniel," she said, almost a whisper. I smiled, letting her think it was love, not vengeance, holding me together. She'd see soon enough. I needed her to face it, not just Mark's ruin, but her own reflection. I'd collected enough. Photos, recordings, receipts, a timeline of her betrayal spanning months. It wasn't enough to know it myself. She had to see the wreckage she'd built. I spent a weekend in my office, piecing it together. A dossier of their affair, clinical and cold, like one of my blueprints. Every email, every lie laid bare. I printed it, bound it, and hid it in my desk, waiting for the moment. At home, I turned the screws tighter. I'd hummed tunes she'd once sung with Mark. I'd heard them in Tom's audio, watching her stiffen. "Where'd you hear that?" she asked once, voice sharp. "Radio." I lied, and she'd nod, unconvinced. I'd leave my laptop open to articles about failing artists, his name buried in the text, and catch her glancing, her jaw tight. She was a ghost in our house now, moving through routines without presence. And I let her haunt herself. Vince struck again. Mark's DUI resurfaced, a tip to the right cop, and his license was gone. He was trapped in Seattle, broke and grounded, his charm useless. Emily's next workshop cancellation came with a weak excuse. Sick client, and I knew she tried to reach him, found nothing. I tapped her burner again. Her calls went unanswered, her texts a string of pleas. "Please, just tell me you're okay." I deleted them from her draft folder, one by one, leaving her shouting into a void. The kids felt the shift. Jacob stopped asking her to watch his games. Lily drew alone. I filled the gaps, taking them out, keeping them laughing, while Emily sank deeper. "You're amazing with them," she said one evening, her voice brittle with guilt. I nodded, letting her stew in it. That night, I left the dossier on the kitchen table, unmarked, and went to bed. She'd find it or she wouldn't. Either way, the trap was set. Morning came and it was gone. She said nothing, her face pale over breakfast, her hands unsteady. I didn't ask. I knew she'd read it. The silence between us thickened, heavy with what she couldn't say. She thought I didn't know, that I'd left it by mistake. Perfect. Let her carry that weight, wondering when I'd strike. Emily broke faster than I'd expected. She stopped eating much, her frame thinning, her eyes ringed with shadows. She'd sit at her desk, staring at blank screens, her creativity choked by the dossier's truth. I'd hear her pacing at night, muttering to herself, and I'd lie still, listening to her cage tighten. She didn't confront me. Couldn't, not without admitting everything, and I let her drown in the unsaid. Mark's endgame arrived via Vince, a public humiliation. His last gallery contact dumped him after leaked emails. Fakes I'd crafted. Showed him begging for cash, promising favors. Word spread online, his name mud, and I watched Emily check her phone, her face falling as his silence stretched. I cut her lifeline and she was flailing. "You okay?" I'd ask, all warmth, and she'd nod, her lies thinner each time. I escalated at home. I'd leave hints, the velvet room receipt on her pillow, a photo of Mark's car in our garage printer. She'd find them, freeze, then hide them, thinking I was careless. Her paranoia grew. She'd check locks twice, glance at me like I was a stranger. The man she'd married wouldn't do this, but that man was gone, buried under her betrayal. The kids pulled away more. Jacob snapped at her one night. "You're never here even when you are." And she cried, locking herself in her office. I comforted him, my voice steady. my heart cold. Lily left a drawing on her desk. 2 stick figures, me and her, Emily absent. I saw her find it, her hands shaking, and said nothing. She was losing them and I let it happen. I wanted her exposed, not just to me, but to everyone. I'd taken Mark's life. Now I'd take her pride. I started with her clients. Anonymous emails, vague but damning. Ask Emily Harper about her Seattle trips. Sent from a burner account. Replies trickled in, her inbox filling with cancellations. Polite but firm. We're going another direction, they'd say, and she'd stare at her screen. Confused, then frantic. Her friends were next. I leaked a photo. Tom's best shot, her and Mark at that cafe. Too close to deny. To a mutual acquaintance, Lisa, with a note. Thought you should know. Lisa spread it, as I knew she would, and the whispers reached Emily by week's end. She came home from a rare outing, face ashen, and locked herself in the bathroom. I heard her sob, the sound raw, and felt nothing but purpose. Mark called once, desperate. His voice on her burner a rasp. They're ruining me, Em. Help me. She begged him to explain, but he hung up, too broken to fight. I'd paid Vince to push him there, threats to his lenders, a nudge to his pride. Emily sat on the couch after, staring at nothing, and I cooked dinner, humming, letting her feel the void. Her reputation crumbled. A design forum she loved banned her after tips about plagiarism. False but convincing. She tried to fight it, her posts shaky, but the damage stuck. I watched her type, delete, type again, her world shrinking. She was alone now, and I was the shadow behind it. She broke completely one Tuesday. I came home to find her in the living room. The dossier open on the coffee table, her eyes wild. You knew, she whispered, voice trembling. I nodded, calm, and sat across from her. How long? She asked. Long enough, I said, and she crumbled, apologies spilling out. Too late, too hollow. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. She'd lost everything. Mark, her work, her friends, the kids' trust. I stripped it all, piece by piece. I stood, leaving her there, and locked my office door. The revenge wasn't done, cruelty takes time. She'd live with this in our house, under my roof, a prisoner of her choices. I'd rebuild with the kids, let her watch, and when the moment was right, I'd finish it. For now, I let her sit in the ruins I'd made, the architect of her downfall. Emily lived in a shadow of herself after that night. The dossier stayed on the coffee table for days, a silent accusation she couldn't escape. She'd shuffle through the house, avoiding my eyes, her voice reduced to murmurs with the kids. I didn't push her, not yet. The beauty of this was her suffering in plain sight, trapped in the life I'd turned into a prison. She'd made her choice with Mark. Now she'd live mine. I kept the pressure subtle but relentless. I'd leave the radio on, tuned to stations playing songs from her Seattle weekends. Tom's audio had given me the playlist. She'd freeze mid-step, her hands trembling, then retreat. I'd hum them too, watching her flinch, knowing each note dragged her back to him, to what she'd lost. The kids noticed her distance but stopped asking. They clung to me instead, and I let her see it. Jacob's high fives, Lily's hugs, all mine now. Her career was ash. Clients ghosted her, her inbox a graveyard of rejections. I'd forwarded more tips through proxies, hints of unprofessionalism, fabricated but believable. Her last big contract, a branding gig, vanished with a curt email. We've heard things. She stared at her laptop, tears streaking her face, and I poured her coffee, my kindness ablaze. Rough day, I'd ask, and she'd nod, mute, crumbling under the weight of my unseen hand. Vince finished Mark off. A staged bar fight, provoked by a hired thug, left him bruised and arrested. Public intoxication, no license to flee. His name hit local news, a small blurb, but enough. I left the paper on the counter, circled in red, and watched Emily find it. She gasped, a sound like breaking glass, and locked herself in her office. I didn't follow. She'd feel that alone too. Her burner stayed silent now. I'd smashed it days ago, her last link severed. She tried to reach out once, cornering me in the kitchen. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice raw. I looked at her, calm, and nodded. "About what?" she faltered, the dossier's truth choking her, and I walked away. She didn't try again. The cage was hers now. Our house, our life, all twisted into something she couldn't escape. I wanted her shame displayed, not just felt. I'd taken her private world. Now I'd take her public one. I planned it carefully, a gallery event, ironic given Mark's fall. A local art collective hosted an open night, and I knew she'd once been a star there, her designs praised. I RSVP'd for us, smiling as I told her, "It'll be good to get out." She hesitated, but my insistence won. She couldn't refuse without cracking the facade. I'd prepared a gift for the night. A slideshow, slipped to the organizer via a fake name. It was simple, her photos with Mark, cafe shots, hotel receipts, emails projected in crisp detail. I titled it Inspiration, a nod to her muse, and watched it load onto their system days before, unnoticed. At the event, she mingled weakly, her smile forced, while I chatted with old friends, playing the doting husband. The room buzzed, wine flowed, and then the screen flickered. Her face appeared first, laughing with him, intimate, undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd, then silence as the slides ticked on. Dates, places, her lies in black and white. She froze, glass slipping from her hand, shattering on the floor. Eyes turned, whispers grew, and I stepped beside her, feigning shock. "Emily, what's this?" I said, loud enough for all to hear. She stammered, pale, and fled, the room erupting behind her. I stayed, accepting sympathies, spinning a tale of betrayal I'd just discovered. Friends hugged me, strangers pitied me, and I soaked it in, every glance her punishment. She'd run home, I knew, but the damage was done, her name, her art, now a scandal. I drove back slowly, savoring the night, her ruin a masterpiece I'd framed. She was a husk when I got home, curled on the couch, the dossier clutched to her chest. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, just stared at the wall, her breathing shallow. I sat across from her, silent, letting the gallery's echoes fill the space. The kids were at a sleepover, planned, of course, and the house felt like a tomb, her life buried in it. "Why?" she whispered finally, her voice a thread. I leaned forward, calm. "You chose this," she cried then, a broken sound, and I watched, unmoved. She'd built a fantasy with Mark, left me to hold the pieces, and now she'd live the wreckage. I didn't need to yell, her tears were proof enough. "I'm sorry," she said, over and over, but it was air, meaningless. I stood, poured myself a drink, and left her there, the weight of her choices her only company. Days blurred. She stopped leaving the house, her office untouched, her phone dead. The kids asked questions. "Why's Mom sad?" And I deflected, keeping them close. Emily tried once to reach them, baking cookies, but Jacob shrugged her off. Lily ignored her. She'd lost them too, and I let it sting. Neighbors whispered, word from the gallery spread, and she shrank further, a ghost in her own skin. I kept the pressure on. Bills piled up, her income gone, mine stretched thin on purpose. "We might lose the house," I'd say, watching her panic, knowing I'd saved enough to cover it. She'd scramble, offering to sell her art, but no one bought. Her name was poison now. I'd nod, sympathetic, and let her drown in the mess I'd orchestrated. I saved the cruelest for last. Mark was a shell, jailed briefly, then released to nothing, his life dust. I tracked him through Vince, found him squatting in a cheap motel, and sent a package. Photos of Emily at the gallery, her shame in full color with a note. "She's done with you." I wanted him to feel her fall too, to know their bond was ash. Vince confirmed he got it. Mark burned them, then vanished, a broken man. Emily's turn came next. I filed for divorce, not quietly but publicly. Court papers leaked to local blogs, her affair the headline. Architect seeks end after wife scandal. They wrote, and she read it, her face crumpling. I moved out with the kids. A new place lined up, leaving her in the house. Foreclosure looming, her fault now. She begged me to stop, clinging to my arm one night. Please, Daniel. I'll fix it. Pulled away. You already did. She had nothing left. Friends gone, career dead, family fractured. I gave her the house keys, a final twist. She'd stay there, alone, watching it slip away. The kids thrived with me, their laughter a balm, and I rebuilt, brick by brick, while she faded. I'd taken her world, piece by piece, and left her to breathe in the ruins. Months later, I stood in my new kitchen, Jacob kicking a ball outside, Lily sketching at the table. The divorce was final, Emily a memory. Last I heard, she'd sold the house for pennies, moved somewhere small, invisible. I'd won, not with fists or shouts, but with precision, turning her betrayal into her cage. The kids asked about her less, their lives full, mine steady. I kept one photo, her and Mark, laughing, the first I'd seen. It sat in my desk, a reminder of what I'd built from their ruin. Revenge wasn't loud. It was patient, cold, an architect's craft. She'd chosen him, and I'd chosen this, her life dismantled, mine reclaimed. I smiled, sipping coffee, the sun rising on a world I'd shaped.